Obandes. The lighthouse keeper recorded the same ship every week for 3 years. No lights, wrong direction, moving against the current. In the final months, he stopped writing it down. Not because it stopped coming, but because he had finally understood what it was and what it wanted. Sit close tonight. Not everything a lighthouse guides in belongs to the living. It is time for chapter 121. A lighthouse keeper's log is one of the most reliable documents a historian can consult. Precise, consistent. The observations of someone trained to see clearly and record accurately. Which is why what she found in the final keeper's log carried a particular weight. Every week for 3 years without exception, a single additional line. A ship sighted at 2:47 in the morning. No lights, wrong bearing, moving against the current, unidentifiable in any registry she could find, and in the final months, nothing. The weekly line simply absent, not because the sightings had stopped, but because by then he knew what was coming and what it had been coming for, all along. A maritime historian was researching the history of a decommissioned lighthouse on a remote stretch of coastline. The lighthouse had operated for several decades before automation made its keeper unnecessary. The Historical Society in the nearest town held the keeper's logs from the final years of manned operation. She requested access. The logs were in good condition, the handwriting consistent and clear throughout, until the final volume. Where the handwriting changed, not dramatically, simply a subtle deterioration in the final months, the particular change that belongs to someone writing under considerable stress or considerable fear. She noted this and began reading from the beginning of the final volume. The anomalous entries began approximately 8 months into the final keeper's tenure. A brief additional line after the standard observations. A ship sighted at 2:47 a.m., no lights showing, vessel type unidentified. The following week, another, same hour, wrong bearing, moving against the current. She marked each one as she went, 1 per week, without exception. The keeper's standard entries entirely professional throughout, weather, ships identified, maintenance completed. Simply these additional weekly lines, growing more detailed as the months passed, the size of the vessel, the quality of its silhouette, the way it moved, and something else she noticed in the later entries. The keeper had begun describing the ship as though it was aware of the lighthouse, of the light, of the person maintaining it, as though it was not simply passing, but arriving. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do, like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here, and that you intend to find your way back. The entries in the final year changed tone entirely. The professional distance of the earlier entries gone, replaced by something that read more like a private account than an official log. The keeper wrote about the ship watching the lighthouse between its weekly arrivals, about lights visible on the water on certain nights that moved in ways no vessel moved, about sounds he heard below the lighthouse on still nights, against the rocks, not the sound of water, the sound of something else entirely. He wrote about not sleeping, about watching the water from the lighthouse gallery in the hours before 2:47, about what he saw approaching on those nights from the wrong direction, without lights, moving against the current, growing larger as it came, and what he had begun to understand about why it kept coming to this particular lighthouse. To this particular light. Shakoi, those final entries, cold in a way that a historian reading them decades later could feel through the page. I wonder, have you ever felt that something in the dark was not simply passing by, but coming specifically for you? Not by accident, not by chance, but with a particular and patient intention that had been building for longer than you had been aware of it? Perhaps you have your own story. Granny is always listening. She tried to find records of what happened to the keeper, found very little. He had been reported missing by the Lighthouse Authority when he failed to respond to a scheduled communication. A vessel had been sent to check on him. The lighthouse was found operational. The light still running, maintained as recently as that morning by all evidence. The keeper's quarters orderly, his log open on the desk to the final entry. No sign of the keeper. No sign of disturbance, no explanation offered by the subsequent investigation that satisfied anyone involved in it. The lighthouse was automated shortly afterward. No replacement keeper was assigned. The authorities' internal notes from that period, she found one, partially, in an archive, referred to the lighthouse by a designation she had not seen applied to any other installation in her research. I think about what a lighthouse guides in. Most of what it guides is ordinary. Ships navigating difficult water in the dark, the light saying, "Here is the shore, here is safe passage. Here is where someone is watching and keeping the light burning for you." But a light on a dark coastline says this to everything on the water, without discrimination, without the ability to choose what it guides toward the shore and what it turns away. And something on that water, something that had no business in any maritime registry, that moved against the current and showed no lights, had been using that lighthouse for exactly the purpose a lighthouse serves, navigating toward it week after week for 3 years, with the patience of something that had been making this journey for considerably longer than the keeper had been there to record it, and had finally arrived. On a night the entry did not finish, and the keeper did not either. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. The lighthouse still stands, still operational, automated now. The light still burns every night on that remote stretch of coastline, still visible from the water, still saying to whatever is out there in the dark, "Here is the shore. Here is where the water ends. Here is the light." And at 2:47 on certain mornings, the Coast Guard logs from that station she found still occasionally note an unidentified vessel, wrong bearing, no lights, moving against the current, arriving at the lighthouse and gone by morning, as it has always been, as it will always be. The keeper is gone, but the light he tended remains, and whatever found its way to that lighthouse 3 years into his tenure found its way back after he was no longer there to write it down, and will continue finding its way back for as long as the light burns on that coast in the dark. At 2:47 in the morning. If this story stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting. And if you wish others to find their way here too, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. I would not object.